we're not building the right conversations in our industry to talk about the things we're not talking about, like psychological safety and mental health, and how do we really take care of each other? So that's part of my declaration. I think when I think about the broken industry, it's not about inventing the next widget to make us more productive. It's about how do we really harness the power of our people and start having conversations about how do we provide more care for each other in the industry.
Success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about living a life that reflects your values and priorities. Welcome to Engineer Your Success, the podcast that helps you lead with intention and live fulfilled.
I want to welcome you to the Engineer Your Success podcast. My name is Dr. James Bryant, your host for the show. Here's a question, or I want to set the scene for you. In engineering, we're trained to trust blueprints, the data, the plan. But what is the most critical factor for success? It's the story that a team tells itself. My guest today, Jason Klous, is a principal at Midion who spent over 30 years uncovering the human connection behind the most complex projects. This is a deep dive into human operating systems and what allows us and allows people in general to engineer success. Jason, it is an honor to have you on the show.
Thanks, James. I'm excited to be here today. Thanks for the invite.
No, this is great. And I want to dive right in your experience. What do you think the biggest reason that technically sound projects fail?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think people have been investigating and researching why these mega projects are failing or large projects are failing. And we've had so many software solutions invented and ways to kind of look at the data and generate reports. But the thing that's largely gone unnoticed is how do people coordinate on projects? Even with some of the great software solutions, things like, Procore and different ways to manage the data and the information, it still relies on human beings to actually coordinate their action and conversations. And even if those conversations are happening on email or on an app, right, there's still this lack of making commitments to each other. And so I think in the research that I've done and the projects that I've worked on, when I see these projects full of super talented, super technical people get off track, go off the rails, and move into this place where they're headed towards failure, very often we're not talking about the things we should be talking about. Do we have trust? Are we coordinating and making commitments to each other? What is the mood or the culture of the project? So it's those missing conversations, I think, that have this huge impact on our technical teams. And sometimes the most technical people have the least skills around having those kinds of conversations.
No, that's interesting. And the way that you describe the project and the interaction, it's as if it's alive.
Yeah. I mean, think about projects compared to like an organization. If you're working with a manufacturing company or maybe even a technology company, for the most part, that team is together, right? It's one team that's going to live through the life of an internal project. But when you think about construction, when you think about design and construction and the built environment, it's like this temporary organization that we bring all these folks together to go build something that's never been done before in a very complex environment. So the challenging thing about that living, breathing organism we call the project environment is that people are constantly coming and going. And I see so many teams, they start a project and they do some team building and they put this effort into building the team early. But guess what? A lot of those people are gone months into the project, right? They've moved on to the next project. People have come in to do some different role, but we don't think about this idea of taking care of our people as an ongoing effort. We think about it as something often that we want to do in the beginning, check the list, get it off, and move on to the real, meat and potatoes of building the project. So when we think about the human element, it's how do we cultivate the right moods on the project? And how do we equip our people to have the right conversations so they can begin to start to talk about what really matters, which is how we coordinate, how do we build trust, How do we navigate those negative moods that are bound to happen with any high performing team?
And so are all of those part of what you call the project story?
Well, yes. So some of the research that I did as part of my PhD work was investigating something called the language action perspective. And the work that I do is historically been around lean construction projects and integrated project delivery projects. And the language action perspective is something that showed up in the history and the development of the lean construction movement. But I think it's been really poorly defined. And one of the goals of my PhD was like, what is this and what isn't it? Traditionally, we think about the language action perspective in lean construction is like the speech acts. How do I make a request and an offer? How do I get a reliable commitment? I mean, one of the tenets of lean construction is reliable promising. Um, Conditions of satisfaction is something that people talk a lot about in the lean construction movement. And what I really wanted to do is expand on the work of Dr. Fernando Flores, one of my mentors and someone I had a chance to study with. When we think about what this world of language is, it also includes listening, and not the traditional listening of like, let me repeat back what you said to me to make sure I heard it right. I mean, that's okay. But thinking about ourselves as listening as historical beings, we listen to our own history because listening is not just inputs and outputs, it's an interpretation. We interpret what we hear based on our own historical backgrounds. And we can help people understand to be aware of the biases and prejudice they might have in their own listening. The language action perspective for me also includes trust. And trust, I think, is like love, right? It's really hard to define it for a lot of people, but we know what it's missing.
Yeah.
So thinking about trust as not just this broad word that has a lot of interpretations, but really what are the domains of trust that we think about? Like when we don't trust someone, do we not trust them to be reliable? Do we not trust them to be competent? Maybe we don't trust them to be sincere, right? When they make a commitment, they have no intention of fulfilling it. So a lot of my work is helping the teams that are experiencing mistrust understand and what the domains are lacking. And once we understand that, we can develop a plan to rebuild it. And for me, the last part of what really the broader picture of the language action perspective is moods. And moods are kind of like emotions, but they're more permanent. We're in moods without choosing to be in them, right? We fall into moods. And moods are contagious. If you've ever, kind of been on a team, or maybe you've got a bad actor or someone on the team
Yeah.
who, right, pretty soon they start to infect the other people on the team. So I think about moods as integral to the language action perspective because they're always in the background and they influence our communication, the way we listen. They influence trust. So it's really the most fundamental or foundational piece of the language action perspective is this idea of moods.
This is Dr. James Bryant, the coach in your corner. If you're an engineering leader who wants to win at work and at home without burning out in the process, keep listening. Every week, I help my private clients bring order back to their leadership, their schedules, and their lives, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they've outgrown their old definition of success and they have no idea what to do next. Together, we define what winning actually looks like for this season of their life. We help them build the clarity and confidence and systems that they need to make it real so they can lead with purpose while staying present for the people who matter most. If this is you, then it's time to take the next step. Visit engineeryoursuccessnow.com to schedule your complimentary integrated success strategy call. Let me help you win at work and at home. So do you have any real world examples of how this language action perspective derailed the project or saved the project?
Yeah, one of the things we do here at Midion is, it's really embedded into the way that we work. We have a series of workshops or a program called the Essential Conversations Program, and I developed it as part of my PhD work. I did a series of case studies around delivering this 12 hours of training to a couple different project teams they weren't doing that great, right? They weren't making commitments. Their meetings were ineffective. When we did some surveys and interviews, they really complained a lot about the overall quality of communication. And when we put those teams of about 24 to 30 people through the training, we kind of picked core leaders on these project teams. when we put them through the workshops and then we kind of interviewed them and surveyed them after, it was super fascinating to me because they reported an increased level of trust. Um, they learned how to have really difficult conversations with each other, and they talked about the fact that if we can have these difficult conversations, it really helps me trust the other person. I'm less likely to think there's a bunch of gossip in the background. It helped them improve the overall meeting effectiveness of the projects, right? Because previously the meetings were places where people reported out and they just talked and had meeting minutes. And as part of the workshops, they learned how to make a more commitment based approach, an action orientated approach in the meeting. So meetings were working sessions where we got commitments from people to do things. So, yeah, I mean, when you think about this ability to improve communication, we see time and time again in our projects that it increases the level of trust on projects. It makes teams move faster and it just increases the reliability. When someone says they're going to do something, they do it. And I think from a leadership perspective, we think about some leaders, they really focus on managing activities, right? They want to manage the work, the day to day stuff. And we might call that micromanaging. And when I get a chance to work with a leader, I help them think about managing outcomes, which for me is how do I manage the promises that my team is making to each other? And I think that makes a much more effective leader and a much more high performing team.
I think that is wonderful insight just from the perspective of how language and the commitments and the things that we say, how it shapes that outcome, how it can be used to shape that outcome, not just for the leader or the team, but for us as individuals as well. That same philosophy can be applied to our everyday life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when we do these workshops, often we'll have break it into 6 2-hour modules, right? So we'll discuss a different topic each and give everyone a chance to go away and practice and reflect. And it's so common for people to come back towards the end of the program and say, this has helped me be more effective at work. I'm seeing better meetings. But you know what? I'm also talking to my kids in a different way, or my spouse and I have kind of built this different relationship. So it's definitely not limited to how we show up at work. I mean, it's something that really holistically helps how we show up in the world and how we kind of change our fundamental way of being and how we show up to others.
Yeah. No, I agree wholeheartedly. And so I do want to talk a little bit about your background as well. Yes, you are, you've finished your PhD, you're this researcher, you've talked about this research, but you also, there's another side to your background that I think the listeners would enjoy as well.
Yeah, I grew up in Minnesota, about an hour north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. My dad was in construction, my grandparents, everyone was. A lot of heavy equipment operators. So when I got out of high school, I wasn't the greatest student. I mean, I liked school, but I didn't really have a path. I was kind of a little bit lost, I think. And I joined the Carpenters Union and went to the Carpenters Apprenticeship in St. Paul, Minnesota. And my third year, I was able to join on with a great company in St. Paul called McGough Construction. And I spent over 15 years with McGough. And I really learned all aspects of the trade. They were a self-performing GC. So I got a chance to do concrete forms and finish work, set cabinets, set doors and hardware and millwork. So I really got an awesome feel for construction from the ground up. I eventually moved into a carpenter foreman position, did a lot of like building layout work and a general foreman, and then eventually a superintendent for them. And along the way, kind of along that journey, I went back to the University of Minnesota at night. McGough was great, supported me. I got my undergrad, my bachelor's in construction management. And I always kind of joke, that took me a while because I was doing it at night. And when I finally got done, my wife was like, God, you're home a lot. Maybe you should find something else to do. I think I was annoying her. So I went and got my MBA from the University of Wisconsin. And that's really where I got exposed to lean. And again, more in the manufacturing and the traditional operations side. But I started to kind of play around with it on the projects. By that time, I was a superintendent. And that kind of led me to find the Lean Construction Institute and Lean Construction and starting to use the last planner system on my projects. And it just kind of opened this whole world to me. And I had a chance to come to Midion, which at the time was Lean Project Consulting. At the time it was Greg Howell and Glenn Ballard Greg Howell and Hal Maycomer, were running the company and they kind of invented this whole world. So I came over here in 2004. I thought I was going to go help all these foremen and commercial projects do the last planner system. And I was here for like 3 weeks, and we got this big project with a large semiconductor company in Ireland. And off I went to Ireland for most of 2014 to help work on this mega project. It's kind of started this really cool journey for me, just working all over the world, almost every state now. Brazil, the UK, Israel, Ireland, in a lot of different project styles, from industrial to healthcare to roads and bridges. So it's been an amazing experience. Yeah, I was just going to add, when I was working in Ireland, I was really trying to figure out what it meant to be a consultant, and I had a chance to meet someone who was working with us named Chauncey Bell, and Chauncey was one of the early inventors and influencers of this language action perspective. So I learned a lot from him early on. And then he introduced me to Dr. Fernando Flores, who many credit with inventing commitment-based management and the language action perspective. And I was able to start to study with him. And that really kicked off my interest in doing a PhD, which landed me at Nottingham Trent University in the UK. And I just wrapped that up last year. So my thesis was on investigating the language action perspective and its influence on the lean construction movement.
Okay. And what did your research findings reveal?
It revealed a couple things. Early on, kind of looking at the existing literature around the language action perspective, I found it wasn't very well defined. So there were a lot of definitions and interpretations in the existing literature. And certainly when I looked more closely at how it was being defined and used in construction and the lean construction movement, it was kind of all over the place. So one of the things I contributed was really developing a model or a definition for what the language action perspective is more holistically and specific to the lean construction movement. And then for me, I'm a practitioner at heart. So really wanting to design a way to test this out on real projects. So invented this essential conversations training. I did a couple of case studies where we looked at the condition of a project before the workshops and how things changed as a result of the workshops, specifically around levels of trust, overall communication effectiveness, reliability of commitments, and things like that. And we saw a really nice increase in all those areas as a result of the workshops.
Okay. So I want to switch gears a little bit and just explore over this transition period. Whether you're talking about from being a foreman, coming over to leading projects to Midion and traveling, doing all this work. What has been the leadership challenge that you've had to deal with over these past few years?
Yeah, that's a great question. Midian is a company that seems like it's always changing, right? We're always adapting to what's happening in the industry while staying true to our historical background in lean construction. So, one of those leadership challenges is just navigating that ever-changing world. The nature of projects has changed. How a lot of the tools that we use are changing. We've got different generations now, both coming into leadership and also coming into the industry. And that's true for Midian, right? We've seen some folks retire, and we've got a different kind of generation of people who are coming into the company. So having to modify my leadership style. But I think the biggest challenge for me is like staying true to the things that I actually study and teach. I work so much with leaders, trying to make them more effective at communication, navigate moods, empower their people. And it's so easy even for me to kind of go back to this, I don't know, command and control kind of style sometimes. So I'm constantly just reflecting and doing some journaling to make sure that the way that I'm showing up is authentic and genuine, but I'm also learning, and then I'm learning about myself, and I love getting feedback from my team. But that's probably the biggest challenge is like not being the person that I'm coaching, trying to be authentic and real. And I think I do a pretty good job, but I think there's days that are better than others too.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think that is a challenge because sometimes we're in this world where we're giving advice or we're asking powerful questions. We're helping people uncover all of these different truths and equipping them with tools to be able to move forward. But we always have to remember to apply those same things to ourselves. And kind of one of the things that I've been talking about recently is that, look, everybody's coming to you for the answers. Everybody's coming to you because you know what to do. And so who's in your corner helping you? So it's
Yeah.
always thinking through and reminding folks that you have people in your corner that's there to support and to help you continue to move forward.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have a group around you that outside of your own company or your own firm, whether they're mentors, depending on where you're at in your career, but even just mentoring other people, can really help you make you more self-aware. But also having some peers, to be able to share your struggles with and share experiences with. And I think I've tried to also think about my role as my friend Chauncey Bell told me early on that a lot of people, if not everyone, has the answer, but very few people have interesting questions.
Mm.
And it's the interesting questions that really spur the innovation, spur the collaboration. So, when I think about myself, both in the leadership position and helping leaders, I'm constantly thinking about like, not only what's the missing conversation, but what's the question that's not being asked here? The thing that's going to prevent us from just putting our blinders on and moving forward. Because honestly, the answers are relatively easy to find in a lot of these situations, but it's the missing questions that really someone in the room needs to be asking those difficult and interesting questions.
So, what is the anatomy of an interesting question?
Ah, that's a great question in itself. I think there's an element of why. Why do we do it this way? Why have we always done it this way? And coming back to the people side, and for me, it's thinking about like what mood might this question provoke in the team? That you want to try to open things up. Some questions are somewhat cynical by nature, or we ask them in such a way that it feels like it's not really a question; it's just a statement hiding as a question. I think the questions have to be authentic. They have to feel like they're coming from a good place, and they have to produce a mood of like wonder or ambition within the team. Like, I want to understand where that question's coming from, because I think if we could answer it, we might open up this new space of possibility for our team to move into that might create something that we're not doing today.
Yeah. I know with a lot of leaders that I work with, we get to this point where, I ask them, are they approaching this situation from a position of challenge or curiosity?
Yeah.
Because you can ask the same question from a challenging perspective. It's going to come out differently. It's going to create a different mood in that meeting than if you ask it from a position of curiosity.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly times where leaders probably need to challenge their teams, but I find that you know, coming from a place of curiosity is probably in most situations going to produce a better conversation in the room. you know, we have to be very careful by the way we challenge. I like to think about not so much challenging people, but sometimes leaders need to make a declaration.
Yeah.
And declarations in my world and the language action world is really a place to open up possibilities. I think about Kennedy's declaration, we're going to go to the moon by the end of the decade, right? He didn't live to even see that. He didn't work on the specific things that NASA was working on to allow it to happen. But the fact that he made that declaration opened up this space for all these talented people to go to work and do what they did. I think there's a room for declarations, but that curiosity is so important in a leader.
So, what's the declaration for Midian?
Ah, that's a great question. I mean, I think for me, it's always been how do I make a declaration to the industry, to say that the way we are currently designing and building projects is ineffective and broken. And again, it's not about having the solution, but using that kind of declaration to open up a space, to mobilize people to go invent something different. And part of my declaration, I think, is grounded in the fact that we have a lot of mental health issues in the construction industry. Suicide is a huge problem. I work on a lot of remote projects in the middle of North Dakota, in the middle of Utah, where, and you've got people who are away from home, who are not connected,
Mm,
who, even though they're working long hours, there's some, there's a lot of idle time too that they're trying to fill with something, right, to keep
yeah.
themselves fulfilled. So we're not taking care of our people the way we should. We're not building the right conversations in our industry to talk about the things we're not talking about, like psychological safety and mental health, and how do we really take care of each other. So that's part of my declaration. I think when I think about the broken industry, it's not about inventing the next widget to make us more productive. It's about how do we really harness the power of our people and start having conversations about how do we provide more care for each other in the industry. I think that will lead to a lot of amazing things and solve a lot of problems that we're currently trying to solve with software and data.
And I think a lot of what we've hit on so far today kind of hits on a concept that we talk about a lot on the podcast, and that is winning at work and at home, because you want to be able to have success in both places. And so I'm curious to understand from you, what do you think about that concept or your thoughts about winning at work and at home?
Yeah, I might think about it in my world as like, how do we create the kind of positive moods that we can experience at work and at home? Um, whenever I talk to people in the industry and we do a lot of like assessments of companies and teams to understand what's not working, people will often talk about the work experience and the home experience. And even one of the exercises we do in essential conversations, we ask people to tell a story about something that's coming up in their personal life, like a family vacation or going to the baseball game with my kids. And right, you just watch like everything about them is like this joy and anticipation. And then we ask them to pivot and talk about a difficult meeting they had that week at work, and everything just right starts to close down and there's some cynicism. So for me, it's like, how do we think about that mood that we want to have in life as an individual and start to look at where is it missing and why is it missing at work? Are we not connected to something? I see so many people in our industry that are stuck in a mood of resignation. And when you talk to them, there's some things that always come up, right? That basically, I've been doing this a long time. It's broken. And the thing that makes it resignation is it's never going to change. This is just the way it is. And I've learned to put up with it and I've learned to work through it. And that's not a great place to be. Not just personally, but if you're an employer and that's what the mood of your organization is, not a lot of cool things are going to happen. So the good thing about resignation is people are only resigned if they cared in the first place. So thinking about how to connect them back to that thing that originally got them excited about being an engineer or a superintendent or just getting into this industry is often a way to start to make some steps to get out of that mood of resignation. And I think starting to understand that we don't have to have different moods at work and at home. We can start to make those connections so that we can have a more fulfilling life. And we don't have to think about turning things on and off like some people talk about, like I turn it off and I go home. And these things can coexist.
Absolutely agree. 100%. So for you personally, what are some of the practices that you employ to help you set the right mood or winning mood both at work and at home?
Having authentic conversations, it to me is the foundation. It creates mood, it creates trust, it creates more reliable promises. So with our clients, often when I get a call or an inquiry, it's something's broken, often in a leadership team. And when I go listen for a day or a half a day, it's like people are reporting one thing to me off to the side and then smiling and talking about none of it in the room with their colleagues. So we have an exercise. It was actually invented by Dr. Flores that we use with teams so that they can start to deliver frank and honest assessments to each other. It's difficult. People squirm, people get uncomfortable. There's a lot of different dynamics, but the end result is a team that has a much higher level of trust. Even though the conversations are difficult, the mood improves. No matter how difficult those conversations are, no matter how many bad things we talk about, right? The mood almost always comes out in a better place at the end of that. And we start to care about each other deeply. And there's a sense of relief that we're finally talking about the things that we all know are in the background. We gossip about them. I won't tell my business partner about this thing that I don't like about how he works, but I'll tell everyone else in the office about it. We're finally having those authentic conversations, and it's such a fundamental thing, but I find no one's good at it. And you really have to teach it and coach it and help people move along with it. It's a struggle for me, right, in my own life, and I need to continue to practice that to get better at it, even personally.
Yeah, and so that was what I was going to follow up with is that I think it's easy for me to conceptualize that in that team environment, in that work environment. It's a little bit more challenging, not insurmountable, but it's more challenging to conceptualize it when I'm thinking about talking to my wife.
Yeah.
if I'm thinking about dealing with situations at home. However, there still is this thread in truth that you want to have those authentic conversations. You don't want to be saying one thing to your spouse and another thing to your kids. As your kids get older and adult kids, you don't want that. So, in that sense, I can see how it can create that distrust in just a situation that you really don't want. And you don't want that in the office and you don't want that at home either.
Yeah, and I think it's all about learning how to do that with a sense of care. We're not reckless. We're not just delivering these assessments off the cuff. We're not trying to hurt other people. We're not trying to invent bad things to say, right? These are authentic, deeply personal, caring conversations. And I think when we deliver them from care, from a point of care, it's interesting. What I find is, let's say you and I are having this conversation and I'm delivering an assessment to you about what you could do better as a teammate, right? Kind of a negative assessment. It's super hard for me, right? I'm as the person delivering the assessment, I'm probably squirming but for you, even though you're the one hearing it, it's a sense of relief because you probably had this sense that that was in the background anyways. The other thing that I coach people to observe is if I'm the one receiving the assessment, it seems counterintuitive, but that assessment reveals a lot more about the person delivering it than me. Because if you say, Jason, give me an assessment of what I can do to be a better team, and I say, James, you need to answer your emails, or you answer your emails late. That tells you that it's something that I'm paying attention to,
Yep.
right? So there's that part of it too, right? It really starts to strengthen that relationship. But overall, they must be delivered with care. They must be delivered to improve the relationship. We're not trying to do harm or damage. If that's the case, then it's not a relationship maybe worth even trying to repair.
When you think about having these authentic conversations, you want to have them with care. What are some suggestions that you have for someone who's struggling to have that type of conversation at home? So we're going to move the venue from the
Mm.
office and translate it. You're home, you're in the living room, you're sitting around the kitchen table. You have to have one of these conversations.
Yeah, I think people who struggle in that world, I think about it as like emotional fortitude. So first of all, you have to cultivate that emotional fortitude in yourself to be able to have difficult conversations. And there's probably no more difficult place to have those conversations than in your personal life. So honestly, I think being aware of your mood, so being able to identify what mood you're in as you prepare for those difficult conversations, because moods are shaped by our past, right? By our experience. But the thing that creates the moods in us, whether it's being nervous, anticipating, it's assessments about what's about to happen, right? So if I'm excited on Friday because I'm in this mood of anticipation for the weekend, I know I'm going to a baseball game at the beach. And the same thing about that difficult conversation at home. So I always tell people, pay attention to your mood. It reveals a lot about the assessments you have about this conversation. Shift your assessments, you'll shift your mood. Using some type, writing things down can often help. What I find when I observe both personal and professional conversations, people tend to talk around the issue. If they're going to deliver something that's perceived as negative or difficult, they might say, James, you're a great guy. You come to work, you're great to work with. You really got to start coming to work on time. But, you're doing a good job. The thing we want to talk about is that piece about being late to work, but we kind of cover that up. We put pillows around it, if you will. The same thing can happen in our personal conversations as well. So I think sometimes writing it down can help you be more direct. And ultimately, the other person typically appreciates that, right? You're delivering it with candor and with care. And again, if the intent of the assessment is to improve the relationship, I think that comes through pretty clear. If the intent of the assessment is to try to do damage or try to create something, um, I think that becomes pretty clear as well. And I'm not a coach, I'm not a therapist. There's probably a place where you move into where it's better to get some professional help around that. But that's how I approach it from my personal style.
I think that's great. And it shows that connection between the principles that you're employing to help companies navigate the issue in the office. And I think you mentioned this earlier, how people will come back and say, it's not only helping me at work, but it's helping me at home. And so it's just this whole throughput that we are the same person. I'm the same person that shows up at work as I am at home. Now, I may choose a different mood or a different aspect of who I am in those places, but it's still me.
Yeah. Being authentic is so critical. I mean, you can fake it for a while, but if you really want to be a good human being and cultivate good relationships, both professionally and personally, you have to be authentic.
No,
Be who you are.
absolutely. Absolutely agree, man. So, Jason, I've really enjoyed this conversation. If someone's listening to this episode and they want to find out more about you, what you're doing, find out more about Midian, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah, we've got a cool website. We just rebranded. So Midion.com, Midion.com is a great place to find out about the company. If you'd like to talk to me personally, which I would love, right? I love having those conversations. Klous at Midion.com. So just JKLOUS at Midion.com is a great way to get a hold of me. And I'll get back to you right away and we can have a chat.
So, we're going to include links both to your company's website and your email in the show notes. So, please check the show notes. Folks, if you want to find out more about Midian or have a conversation with Jason. And so, finally, as we get to close out the episode, I am going to switch things around and allow you to become the interviewer and I am the interviewee. So, what's one question that you have for me?
Let me think about that for a second. My question is, you interview a lot of progressives and forward-thinking people in the industry. What do you see more broadly, like the focus on the human side? Is that starting to shift in the industry? Are you seeing a change? Um,
Yes, I have seen a change of that where people are much more open in talking about the human side of the industry and even the human cost of burnout, the human cost of continuing to work all of these hours and pushing through. There are a lot more people that I talk to that are now acknowledging that that may not have been the best approach, or at least acknowledging the negative impacts of that approach.
oh, that's great to hear. It's time for a shift. So I'm glad your broader conversations are backing that up, and you're hearing more of that out there.
Hi, this is James, the coach in your corner. As we close out this episode, here's one thing that really stood out to me: the power of authentic conversations, not just at work, but also at home. We often avoid the conversations that matter most. At work, we complain to colleagues instead of addressing the issues with management or leadership. At home, we talk around problems instead of actually talking and working through them. And that avoidance, it creates exactly what we don't want: distrust and disconnection. But here's a suggestion for this week that can help you win at work and at home. I want you to pick one conversation, the one that you've been avoiding. I want you to write down what it is that you want to say, because that's going to help you be more direct. You may have to go through a few iterations of that, but then I want you to ask yourself, how do I want to package this? Is it from a position of challenge or curiosity? That choice changes everything, because challenge tests people. And in some cases, that is exactly what is needed. Curiosity helps you learn from people, and that can provide greater insights to understand the why behind certain decisions. Please remember to have these conversations with care, but also with candor, because that is how you build trust. That's how you move forward. And that is how you win at work and at home. I'm Dr. James Bryant, your guide and the coach in your corner. Be great this week.